In the Gospel of John, he never mentions miracles. John is always calling the miracles signs, which means a sign points to something. It's never about itself, it's a reference to something else. So these miracles in John are signs pointing to the Messiah. In fact, everything in John is a sign pointing us from the very beginning of John the Baptist crying out that Jesus is the way. So these signs point us to Jesus as Messiah, and the very first sign, the very first miracle that John tells about is the wedding at Cana. And this story is something that has just captivated me lately. I've been reading it again and again and trying to figure out what it points to and why it's first. Why tell the story of a wedding and wine as the very first miracle, the very first sign? What is John trying to point us towards? So from the very beginning of that miracle, John says that on the third day, Jesus and his disciples and his mother were at a wedding where they ran out of wine. And Mary says to him, they're out of wine. She points to an obvious thing. And Jesus says to her, "Woman, my time has not yet come." Well, we read that as, maybe some tone, as in, don't take that tone with me. But really, that's a compassionate statement. That's a moment where Jesus is saying with compassion and relating to Mary in the same way that he says to her from the cross, "Woman, behold your son," or says to Mary Magdalene in the garden, "Woman, why are you weeping?" So in that moment, Jesus is saying, my time has not yet come. The hour has not yet come. The hour from him is the hour on the cross. But she goes ahead and says to these servants at this wedding, "Do whatever he tells you to do." That's a pretty good statement for any of us wanting to be pointed to Jesus. Do whatever he tells you to do. And they bring these big jars of water and they fill them up. They're purification jars meant to purify for ritual purification, and suddenly they're not water anymore, they're wine, and the best wine that anyone has tasted at this wedding, and everyone is confounded by it. Now, this is not a miracle that launches Jesus' career. It's not done in a crowd, it's not even done in public. This is a private party, and the only witnesses are servants and women, both of them not reliable witnesses in this culture. So what is going on here? What is Jesus trying to tell us? Because he's certainly not trying to get attention from the public or the crowds. What I love in this story is that the people in the story, whether we realize it or not reading it, the people are desperate. The groom and his family are desperate because in the social contract of the day, by inviting people to this wedding, they have essentially promised to feed them and give them what was the common beverage, the drink for adults, which was wine, for up to 2 weeks. These wedding celebrations lasted a long time, and they've run out of wine before they ran out of wedding. And so in this moment, these people are desperate. They're about to lose face in the public. They're about to lose their status in society, lose their friendships, lose their reputation, have to send people home from a wedding, and that's not a good sign for the bride or the groom or their families. So these are desperate people. That is what I think connects this miracle to all the others, is that every miracle in the Gospels is preceded by desperation. We have desperate people, and we have Jesus showing up to answer a need. The people run out, and then they run to Jesus for help. And so when I look at this, I see that all the other miracles are also signs that desperate people come to God for miracles. I'm not so sure that God is waiting on us to perform miracles. I think sometimes he's ready, and we just aren't asking. We aren't looking. We aren't opening our eyes because we haven't reached this point of desperation. In the Gospels, we see, someone's sick and they need healing, or someone's dead and they need resurrection, or someone is demon-possessed, and so they're desperate for something that they can't do on their own, and God does it for them. So all of these places are just affirming for us that when we get to places where we run out, where we're dry, where we're desperate, that's not failure, it's opportunity for God to move. That he loves to move in places in our lives where we are dry and thirsty and desperate. And it shows up in miracle after miracle. Now, I'll tell you where I got hung up was the miracle of Peter walking on water, right? Because Peter's not really desperate. He's in a boat, he's in safety, and then out of the boat is not safety. Out of the boat there are wind and waves and the potential of sinking under this water, and he gets out of safety and into the place of danger. He actually asks for it. He says, "Lord, will you bring me? Can I walk to you? If it is you, let me walk to you." So Jesus is out on the waves, which in those days was a symbol of the place where evil resided in the sea. Peter's pretty familiar with the sea. He's a fisherman. So Peter actually asks to be placed in a desperate situation. And the reason I love that is you and I are not always in points of crisis. Well, I hope we're not. Our lives are not always desperately shaped, but our hearts can be in places that are eager and hungry and desperate for Jesus. Peter actually prays the prayer to be more desperate. He goes from safety to danger and desperation because he longs to be where Jesus is and move where Jesus moves. So when I read Cana, I think this, is my heart hungry for Jesus? Am I desperate for his presence in my life? Do I want him so much that I will cry out for him? Even at the points in my life where my life is not desperate, is my heart hungry and desperate for him? So I pray that prayer of Peter, Lord, if it's you, let me come to you. Put me in a place where I can be hungry and filled, where I can be thirsty and filled by you. So when I read the wedding at Cana and read this sign, John says, it points me to a God who loves it when we ask, who loves when we come to him. And really, Jesus is the Savior of desperate people. So that, for me, is the sign of Cana and really the beginning of every miracle that Jesus did in the Gospels.